Hey, you guys. Um, Not everything demands a live stream, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on the Quantico event that happened this morning. There was a lot of build up to it in the recent days in the media, and I've made a highlight reel that we'll review here. But let me set it up first with some of the background, and then we'll go through the highlight reel and address some of your comments. So, thanks for showing up. Looks like folks are gathering quickly here. So Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called a short notice meeting that happened early this morning, September 30th, of all U.S. military generals and admirals, 1-star and above, who were in command positions, not staff positions, along with their senior enlisted leaders at the Marine Corps University at Quantico Marine Corps Station, which is about 30 miles down I-95 from the Pentagon. Here's a map. I actually lived on base at Quantico. My dad was stationed at the Marine Corps Development and Education Command when I was a plebe at the Naval Academy in 1978-79. The meeting, as I said, was for those in command billets only as opposed to staff billets. And it's unclear how many folks that means. You know, the estimates went as high as 1,000. Others were saying a couple of hundred. But as you can see from this screenshot here, the auditorium was full. So it was certainly a couple hundred. The Pentagon did not publish a public agenda or give any indication what the unprecedented gathering was for. And reports suggested that the high-ranking attendees, which included combatant commanders in charge of Middle East, Western Pacific areas of responsibility, were unaware of why they'd been summoned on such short notice, basically given 4 days to clear their calendars and get to Quantico. So when news of this meeting broke last Thursday, President Trump was initially or seemed unaware of it. And when he was asked by the White House press corps, his initial response was, let him, meaning Secretary Hegseth, be friendly with the generals and admirals from all over the world. You act like this is a bad thing. Isn't it nice that people are coming from all over the world to be with us? And then subsequent to that statement, the president decided that he was also going to attend the, let's call it hush-hush event, which he then described as a, quote, very nice meeting talking about how well we're doing militarily. He said the gathering would have a, quote, good message, end quote, that includes, quote, talking about being in great shape, talking about a lot of good, positive things. He went on to say, you know, the expression esprit de corps, that's what it's all about. We're talking about what we're doing, what they're doing. I presume that means the enemy, and how we're doing. But putting aside his rocky confirmation process that brought up accusations of public drunkenness and sexual battery, events since Secretary Hegseth took the job last January have not necessarily engendered a feeling of esprit de corps among some of those at the top of active duty leadership. First, there were the firings of several high-ranking officers, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Brown, and the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Franchetti, mere weeks after Trump returned to office, which wasn't entirely a surprise. They sort of signaled that this is what they were going to do, but they acted on that very quickly. And then there was what has been coined the Signalgate controversy, where Hegseth and other cabinet officials inadvertently shared classified airstrike details with a reporter, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, on a text message app, an action that potentially hazarded the aviators involved in the strike because they gave times on target. And then there was the press conference following the Midnight Hammer strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, where Secretary Hegseth berated the Pentagon press corps for questioning how effective the operation was. It kind of turned into a dressing down, and this thumbnail is referring to the fact he launched into his former colleague at Fox News, Jennifer Griffin, and called her the worst. So certainly active duty flag officers were watching that and like, wow, this guy isn't beyond going off on people if he gets angered. And then Hegseth stopped a shipment of military equipment that was bound for Ukraine without consulting President Trump, which embarrassingly came to light during a cabinet meeting with the press in the room, which forced Secretary Hegseth to reverse the order. And then on top of all of that, there was a recent pledge, as it were, from the Secretary of War to cut the number of four-star admirals and generals by 20%. So if you add all of these things to that, you get a lot of concern from attendees to this short fuse meeting about what was going to happen in the auditorium. Would it be a press talk or a public firing? Okay, so I will tee up this highlight reel, and I'll stop it from time to time. I'm going to bring up the comments now, and we'll try to address comments as we go along here. Again, we got 1,500 and counting folks here. Thank you for showing up on a weekday. So here's the highlight reel. It starts with General Kane introducing Secretary Hegseth. I will say I had a chance to chat with the chairman, General Kane, on the sidelines of the Navy VMI game a couple of weeks ago. He's a pretty cool guy, and was familiar with the channel. I asked him to be on, and he's like, "Yeah, I can't." But we talked F-16s a little bit, and F-14s, and so a good guy. And so anyway, I just mentioned that because I had not met him before then. So anyway, here he is introducing the Secretary of War.
Now it is my distinct honor to introduce our nation's Secretary of War, the Honorable Pete Hegseth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So a smattering of applause before somebody says attention on deck, and that stops the applause.
Sure, thank you. Please take your seats.
So note that the Secretary directed the room to take their seats. This is something the President doesn't do later. I'll show you that in a few minutes here.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the Joint Chiefs, Generals, Admirals, Commanders, Officers, Senior Enlisted, NCOs, Enlisted, and every member of our American military, good morning. Good morning and welcome to the War Department, because the era of the Department of Defense is over. You see, the motto of my first platoon was those who long for peace must prepare for war.
So he goes from behind the podium and walks around. I don't know what the teleprompter situation was, whether he had a number of them or if he memorized the speech, but I will say he was very prepared and I was impressed. He is on message, which stands in sharp contrast to the Commander-in-Chief who follows him. But he was definitely prepared for this. It's a polished presentation.
This is, of course, not a new idea. This crowd knows that. The origin dates to the 4th century Rome and has been repeated ever since, including by our first Commander-in-Chief, George Washington, the first leader of the War Department. It captures a simple yet profound truth. To ensure peace, we must prepare for war. From this moment forward, the only mission of the newly restored Department of War is this: warfighting, preparing for war and preparing to win, unrelenting and uncompromising in that pursuit. Not because we want war, no one here wants war, but it's because we love peace. We love peace for our fellow citizens. They deserve peace, and they rightfully expect us to deliver it. Our number one job, of course, is to be strong so that we can prevent war in the first place. The president talks about it all the time. It's called peace through strength. And as history teaches us, the only people who actually deserve peace are those who are willing to wage war to defend it. That's why pacifism is so naive and dangerous. It ignores human nature and it ignores human history. Either you protect your people and your sovereignty, or you will be subservient to something or someone. It's a truth as old as time. And since waging war is so costly in blood and treasure, we owe our republic a military that will win any war we choose or any war that is thrust upon us. Should our enemies choose foolishly to challenge us, they will be crushed by the violence, precision, and ferocity of the War Department.
So definitely setting the tone here with some tough talk right from the outset. Also, the thing about War Department, not Defense Department, is sort of the theme of this whole presentation.
In other words, to our enemies, FAFO. If necessary, our troops can translate that for you.
So you heard a couple of whoops there when he said FAFO, of course. That means fuck around and find out.
If I've learned one core lesson in my 8 months in this job, it's that personnel is policy. Personnel is policy. The best way to take care of troops is to give them good leaders committed to the warfighting culture of the department. Not perfect leaders, good leaders.
So it's interesting that he makes that distinction, right? Not perfect leaders, good leaders.
Competent, qualified, professional, agile, aggressive, innovative, risk-taking, apolitical, faithful to their oath and to the Constitution. For too long, we've promoted too many uniformed leaders for the wrong reasons, based on their race, based on gender quotas, based on historic so-called firsts. We've pretended that combat arms and non-combat arms are the same thing. We've weeded out so-called toxic leaders under the guise of double-blind psychology assessments, promoting risk-averse, go-along-to-get-along conformists instead. You name it, the department did it. Foolish and reckless political leaders set the wrong compass heading, and we lost our way. We became the woke department. This administration has done a great deal.
So obviously this is the sort of foundation of his approach to the opportunity. I'm sure this is what he sold to Donald Trump during the campaign. And this is what he's acting on. And you'll hear unflinchingly the actions he's taken and intends to take on that note.
From day one, to remove the social justice, politically correct, and toxic ideological garbage that had infected our department, to rip out the politics. No more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses. No more climate change worship. No more division, distraction, or gender delusions. No more debris. As I've said before, and will say again, we are done with that shit. Think of it as the golden rule test. Jesus said, do unto others that which you would have done unto yourself. It's the ultimate simplifying test of truth. The new War Department golden rule is this: do unto your unit as you would have done unto your own child's unit.
So I know where he's trying to go. That's kind of a clunky analogy.
Would you want him serving with fat or unfit or undertrained troops? Or alongside people who can't meet basic standards? Or in a unit where standards were lowered so certain types of troops could make it in? In a unit where leaders were promoted for reasons other than merit, performance, and warfighting? The answer is not just no, it's hell no. When it comes to combat arms units, and there are many different stripes across our joint force, the era of politically correct, overly sensitive, don't hurt anyone's feelings leadership ends right now.
Okay, are you getting it yet?
At every level, either you can meet the standard, either you can do the job, either you are disciplined, fit, and trained, or you are out. And that's why today, at my direction, and this is the first of 10 Department of War directives that are arriving at your commands as we speak and in your inbox.
So just remember that every time he and President Trump use Department of War, that's just kind of a nickname at this point. It's not official. I mean, they're using letterhead. They've changed some of the signage, but Congress has to approve that change. And the other thing about this, and I invite you to watch the episode I did a couple of years ago about the revolt of the Admirals in 1947, when the Defense Department was created under the same legislation that created the CIA and the United States Air Force. The intent was to pivot from World War II into the Cold War, and the threat was not the Axis, Japan and Hitler's Germany. It was now a nuclear Russia. So I think what they've co-opted here with, let's go back to the Department of Defense, left a lot of the historic realities out of that. Also, the War Department did not cover the Navy. The Navy's budget came from the Department of the Navy. So there's some details that have been left on the floor here as we're just sort of omni make it now the War Department because it sounds tougher, right? So just keep that in mind.
Today, at my direction, each service will ensure that every requirement for every combat MOS, for every designated combat arms position, returns to the highest male standard only. Because this job is life or death. Today, at my direction, we are also adding a combat field test for combat arms units that must be executable in any environment at any time and with combat equipment. These tests, they'll look familiar. They'll resemble the Army Expert Physical Fitness Assessment or the Marine Corps Combat Fitness Test. I'm also directing that warfighters in combat jobs execute their service fitness test at a gender-neutral, age-normed male standard scored above 70%. It all starts with physical fitness and appearance. If the Secretary of War can do regular, hard PT, so can every member of our joint force. Frankly, it's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon and leading commands around the country and the world. It's a bad look. It is bad, and it's not who we are.
Okay, I don't think anybody would have any quarrel with what he just said, right? Okay.
So whether you're an airborne ranger or a chairborne ranger, a brand new private or a 4-star general, you need to meet the height and weight standards and pass your PT test. But today, at my direction, every member of the joint force at every rank is required to take a PT test twice a year, as well as meet height and weight requirements twice a year.
I think that's already the case. So that isn't really a new directive.
Every year of service. Also today, at my direction, every warrior across our joint force is required to do PT every duty day. Should be common sense. I mean, most units do that already, but we're codifying it. And we're not talking like hot yoga and stretching. Real hard PT, either as a unit or as an individual. At every level, from the Joint Chiefs to everyone in this room to the youngest private, leaders set the standard. And so many of you do this already.
So for the record, hot yoga isn't easy, and you should stretch before you work out. How do I know this?
Ready. Active, guard, and reserve. This also means grooming standards. No more beards, long hair, superficial individual expression. We're going to cut our hair, shave our beards, and adhere to standards. Because it's like the broken windows theory of policing. It's like when you let the small stuff go, the big stuff eventually goes.
Okay, so as the old guy, I'm also wondering about tattoos, because I see midshipmen with sleeve tattoos when walking around Annapolis. The standard used to be that you couldn't have tattoos that showed when you were wearing a short sleeve uniform. Now, obviously, that's not the standard, and I think it's almost a higher percentage of troops and mids have tattoos than don't. I don't have any data to support that, but it's interesting how he's talking about beards and hair, weight and whatever, but he leaves out tattoos, and he's famously got a lot of tattoos. So I just note that.
So you have to address the small stuff. This is on duty, in the field, and in the rear. If you want a beard, you can join Special Forces. If not, then shave. We don't have a military full of Nordic pagans, but unfortunately, we have had leaders who either refuse to call BS and enforce standards, or leaders who felt like they were not allowed to enforce standards. Both are unacceptable.
So not all Special Forces guys can have beards at all times. Only those guys who are in sort of a deployable status who could go, strange places where they need that kind of anonymity from time to time. So, it's not like Omni Special Forces grow a beard.
And that's why today, at my direction, the era of unprofessional appearance is over. No more beardos. The era of rampant and ridiculous shaving profiles is done.
I had never heard of a beardo until this morning.
Simply put, if you do not meet the male-level physical standards for combat positions, cannot pass a PT test, or don't want to shave and look professional, it's time for a new position or a new profession. Upholding and demanding high standards is not toxic.
Okay, so this is an interesting part of the presentation where he's addressing sort of this mission creep that's occurred in the last 10, 15 years regarding toxic leaders. Something I've written about in the Punks series, Soup Campbell particularly, you could say was a toxic leader. So listen to what he says about how subordinates have weaponized some programmatics under the auspices of toxic leadership.
Enforcing high standards, not toxic leadership. Leading warfighters toward the goals of high, gender-neutral, and uncompromising standards in order to forge a cohesive, formidable, and lethal Department of War is not toxic. It is our duty, consistent with our constitutional oath. Real toxic. Okay,
so a few times in the presentation, he mentions the Constitution, which I'm grateful for. It's the Constitution that underpins your service, constitutional duties. I was glad to hear that.
Toxic leadership is endangering subordinates with low standards. Real toxic leadership is promoting people based on immutable characteristics or quotas instead of based on merit. Real toxic leadership is promoting destructive ideologies that are an anathema to the Constitution and the laws of nature and nature's God.
Okay, so this is sort of mangling the logic of what toxic leadership is to a political point of view. Toxic leadership is not being a progressive Democrat.
As Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence. The definition of toxic has been turned upside down, and we're correcting that.
Yeah, I would say that while you're correcting it being turned upside down, in the process, you turned it upside down. So there you go.
That's why today, at my direction, we're undertaking a full review of the department's definitions of so-called toxic leadership, bullying, and hazing, to empower leaders to enforce standards without fear of retribution or second guessing. Of course, you can't do like nasty bullying and hazing. We're talking about words like bullying and hazing and toxic. They've been weaponized and bastardized inside our formations, undercutting commanders and NCOs. No more. Setting, achieving, and maintaining high standards is what you all do. And if that makes me toxic, then so be it. Second, today at our direction, we're ensuring that every service, every unit, every schoolhouse, and every form of professional military education conduct an immediate review of their standards. Now, we've done this in many places already, but today it goes across the entire Department of War. Any place where tried and true physical standards were altered, especially since 2015 when combat arms standards were changed to ensure females could qualify, must be returned to their original standard. Other standards have been manipulated to hit racial quotas as well, which is just as unacceptable. This too must end. Merit only. The president talks about it all the time, merit-based. Here are two basic frameworks I urge you to pursue in this process.
So he'll talk about these two frameworks. So you heard him mention 2015, as a time, a year when standards changed, and then he'll mention 1990 and ask the question in sort of the abstract, why did it change from 1990? So I think those dates are arbitrary at some level. A better point would have said, what does the standard need to be based on the mission? Because when you say it needs to be returned to the standard of 2015, it's like, well, what is that based on? And you'll also hear him talk about the E6 standard and the 1990 standard. It's like, okay, I got it, but what is it based on? And he doesn't address that. So it's sort of like this nostalgia without any sort of grounding in data or actual facts.
Standards I call, my staff's heard all about them, the 1990 test and the E6 test. The 1990s test is simple. What were the military standards in 1990? And if they have changed, tell me why. Was it a necessary change based on the evolving landscape of combat? Or was the change due to a softening, weakening, or gender-based pursuit of other priorities?
So that's a fair question. As a guy who was in the Navy in 1990, particularly I'm thinking about the integration of females into carrier aviation. I've documented a bunch of missteps, let's call it, to be polite about it, during that era. So fair enough. But again, I'm asking, okay, show your work, basically, behind this thesis.
1990s seems to be as good a place to start as any. And the E6 test. Ask yourself, does what you're doing make the leadership, accountability, and lethality efforts of an E6, or frankly an O3, does it make it easier or more complicated?
So the other thing about these dates that he's chosen and the sort of subtext of those choices is it's historically myopic, right? So and people have written great works about the integration of African-American warfighters in various points of our history, female integration writ large. So, the same standard, if you're like, well, the last war, and he makes this point, the last war that we won is World War II. We haven't won a war since then. He puts an asterisk on Desert Storm. So if that's the Make America Great Again era, then what you're saying is it should have just been white males in the U.S. military from that point forward, sort of. So anyway, it's just interesting. He mentions when he said 1990, I'm like, okay, I don't quite know what made that a special time necessarily. 2015 makes sense because that's when there was a lot of changes going on with Ranger School, and there was a lot of sort of political pressure to not quite lower the standards, but to open the doors in certain warfare specialties, including Navy submarines to female service members.
Does the change empower staff sergeants, petty officers, and tech sergeants to get back to basics? The answer should be a resounding yes. The E6 test or O3 test clarifies a lot, and it clarifies quickly. Because war does not care if you're a man or a woman. Neither does the enemy.
Now, and that's true. It's the same thing I said in the Kara Holt Green episode, which is the airplane doesn't know what gender you are or race, right? So that is empirically true. But again, show your work on how the standard was arrived at.
Is the weight of your rucksack, the size of an artillery round, or the body weight of a casualty on the battlefield who must be carried?
Okay, so he gave 3 examples there that all seem valid to me.
This, and I want to be very clear about this, this is not about preventing women from serving. We very much value the impact of female troops. Our female officers and NCOs are the absolute best in the world. But when it comes to any job that requires physical power to perform in combat, those physical standards must be high and gender neutral. If women can make it, excellent. If not, it is what it is. If that means no women qualify for some combat jobs, so be it. That is not the intent, but it could be the result, so be it. It will also mean that weak men won't qualify because we're not playing games.
Okay, so I think all of that is a fair statement.
This is combat. This is life or death. Third, we are attacking and ending the walking on eggshells and zero defect command culture. A risk-averse culture means officers execute not to lose instead of to win.
So this point particularly resonated with me because I have a lot of former squadron mates and academy classmates who got out of the Navy and Marine Corps because of this dynamic. So listen to what he says here.
A risk-averse culture means NCOs are not empowered to enforce standards. Commanders and NCOs don't take necessary risks or make tough adjustments for fear of rocking the boat or making mistakes. A blemish-free record is what peacetime leaders covet the most, which is the worst of all incentives. We, as senior leaders, need to end the poisonous culture of risk aversion and empower our NCOs at all levels to enforce standards. Truth be told, for the most part, we don't need new standards. We just need to reestablish a culture where enforcing standards is possible.
That is true.
And that's why today at my direction, I'm issuing new policies that will overhaul the IG, EO, and MEO processes. I call it the No More Walking on Eggshells policy. We are liberating commanders and NCOs. We are liberating you. We are overhauling an inspector general process, the IG, that has been weaponized, putting complainers, ideologues, and poor performers in the driver's seat. We're doing the same with the equal opportunity and military equal opportunity policies, the EO and MEO at our department. No more frivolous complaints, no more anonymous complaints, no more repeat complainants, no more smearing reputations, no more endless waiting, no more legal limbo, no more sidetracking careers, no more walking on eggshells.
So to that, I say bravo. Now, these programs, all the ones you rattled off, all the acronyms were created for valid reasons. But there was this overreach for a long time. This isn't new. When I was teaching at the Naval Academy, late 90s, early aughts, what you saw was smart mids read the programmatics and then weaponized them, as the secretary mentions, against a leader they didn't like. That wasn't the intent of those programs. It was supposed to give folks an avenue for teeing up injustice, but that's not how it was used. So I know this has been used throughout the fleet, throughout the military in the last couple of decades by underperforming and misguided, insincere subordinates. And as he says rightly, they've weaponized these programs to end the careers of a CO that was trying to take action against their poor performance. So this initiative, I think, is right on.
Of course, being a racist has been illegal in our formation since 1948. The same goes for sexual harassment. Both are wrong and illegal. Those kinds of infractions will be ruthlessly enforced. But telling someone to shave or get a haircut or to get in shape or to fix their uniform or to show up on time or to work hard, that's exactly the kind of discrimination we want. We are not civilians. You are not civilians. You are set apart for a distinct purpose. So we, as a department, need to stop acting and thinking like civilians and get back to basics and put the power back in the hands of commanders and NCOs. Commanders and NCOs who make life and death decisions.
So Slider 292 asks, is he really talking about sexual harassment? In some cases, he might be. And again, this is whatever every case differs. Every complaint differs. So if there was actual, like valid sexual harassment over the course of the investigation, the proper action would be taken. But the mere mention of sexual harassment without a fact set to back it up was being used by subordinates to kneecap an administrative action by a CO or to prevent he or she from taking that action in the first place, right? So a couple of folks have said rape is back on the table, ... And oh, by the way, if you say crap like that, I'm going to block you from the chat. So don't be an asshole here. I'm actually reading the comments as we're showing this. So keep it civil, and productive. But Slider, he's not necessarily talking about it doesn't mean, while he's talking about sexual harassment, it doesn't mean that sexual harassment isn't a punishable offense now.
Commanders and NCOs who enforce standards and ensure readiness. The core of this speech is the 10 directives we're announcing today. They were written for you, for Army leadership, for Navy leadership, for Marine Corps leadership, for Air Force leadership, Space Force leadership. These directives are designed to take the monkey off your back and put you, the leadership, back in the driver's seat. Move out with urgency because we have your back. I have your back. And the Commander-in-Chief has your back. Fourth, at the War Department, promotions across the Joint Force will be based on one thing: merit. Colorblind, gender-neutral, merit-based. The entire promotion process, including evaluations of warfighting capabilities, is being thoroughly re-examined. We've already done a lot in this area, but more changes are coming soon. We'll promote.
Okay, so just a historical footnote to that notion, right? So there were certain warfare specialties in the late 80s, early 90s that only females held. And so as they were trying to widen the combat exclusion laws and get female service members the opportunities to serve, never mind what they were doing to the standards, but they had to do some of this calculus to open the door. So if you do, let's say I'm a Tomcat pilot in 1987, so I'm a Tomcat pilot, or I'm a TA-4 pilot stationed in Key West, a female TA-4 pilot stationed in Key West, who's not allowed to deploy on an aircraft carrier. Well, that female, and it's not because I'm not capable as an aviator, it's just because that female exclusion won't allow me to get promoted beyond the rank of, let's say, 05, right? I could be a commander of the squadron at Key West, but I'm never going to be a CAG or a carrier CO, not to mention a flag officer. So the sort of predicate of his thesis is flawed, on its face.
Top performing officers and NCOs faster and get rid of poor performers more quickly. Evaluations, education, and field exercises will become real evaluations, not box checks, for every one of us at every level. These same reforms happened before World War II as well. General George Marshall and Secretary of War Henry Stimson did the same thing. And we won a world war because of it. Fifth, as you have seen, and the media has obsessed over, I have fired a number of senior officers since taking over.
So the media didn't obsess over it, they reported on it, right? This is the same beef he had with the media asking what the BDA yielded after the Midnight Hammer. So obviously, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth has a big problem with the media.
The previous chairman, other members of the Joint Chiefs, combatant commanders, and other commanders. The rationale for me has been straightforward. It's nearly impossible to change a culture with the same people who helped create or even benefited from that culture, even if that culture was created by a previous president and previous secretary. My approach has been simple. When in doubt, assess the situation, follow your gut, and if it's the best for the military, make a change. We all serve at the pleasure of the president every single day. But in many ways, it's not their fault. It's not your fault.
So this is a point I've made in a previous episode, which I think is valid, and I'm glad he brought this up.
As foolish and reckless as the woke department was, those officers were following elected political leadership. An entire generation of generals and admirals were told that they must parrot the insane fallacy that, quote, our diversity is our strength. Of course, we know our unity is our strength.
So I like that. But again, they're not just parroting. This is civilian leadership controls the military. It's the Constitution.
They had to put out dizzying DEI and LGBTQI plus statements. They were told females and males are the same thing, or that males who think they're females is totally normal. They were told that we need a green fleet and electric tanks. They were told to kick out Americans who refuse an emergency vaccine. They followed civilian policies set by foolish and reckless political leaders.
So that's true. Now listen to the distinction he makes about those who were not guilty of anything and those who were removed because of what he just said. It's kind of a very, let's call it, nuanced difference.
Our job, my job, has been to determine which leaders simply did what they must to answer the prerogatives of civilian leadership, and which leaders are truly invested in the woke department.
So I don't know what that means, right? It's sort of like those who followed orders and those who like actually really followed orders and internalized the order. You know, so I think the lesson here is, as a career military personnel, either senior enlisted or officer, be careful how much you lean into the policies of any given administration, I guess.
Therefore incapable of embracing the War Department and executing new lawful orders.
So it's like if you were really one of Biden's or Obama's favorite sons, now that's not going to work, and you need to be. This is sort of muted when he says, because he's not demanding loyalty, and no, I don't think anybody had to sign anything on the way in or out. But that's sort of the subtext here of the new outlook of the War Department.
That's it. It's that simple. So for the past 8 months, we've gotten a good look under the hood of our officer corps. We've done our best to thoroughly assess the human terrain. We've had to make trade-offs and some difficult decisions. It's more of an art than a science. We have been and will continue to be judicious, but also expeditious. The new compass heading is clear. Out with the Shirellis, the Mackenzies, and the Millies, and in with the Stockdales, the Schwarzkopfs, and the Pattons.
So I don't think that ad hominem jab was necessary here. You know, I've met General Mackenzie. He's a great Marine. If you read his memoir, he did not agree with the Biden pullout strategy and said so forcefully, and was told to, you know, shut up and color. So I don't think Hegseth needed to go after those three. Those are favorite targets of the right. Of course, I've did the episode about General Milley and the cautionary tale that was his tenure as the chairman, but I don't think that particular statement was required.
But I look out at this group and I see great Americans, leaders who have given decades to our great republic at great sacrifice to yourselves and to your families. But if the words I'm speaking today are making your heart sink, then you should do the honorable thing and resign. We would thank you for your service. But I suspect, I know, the overwhelming majority of you feel the opposite. These words make your hearts full. You love the War Department because you love what you do, the profession of arms. You are hereby liberated to be an apolitical, hard-charging, no-nonsense constitutional leader that you joined the military to be.
Okay, so if we take them at face value, that's a great statement. But note the apolitical and follow the Constitution part. Okay, so if that's what you really mean, Mr. Secretary, then roger that.
Sixth, we must train and we must maintain. Any moment that we are not training on our mission or maintaining our equipment is a moment we are less prepared for preventing or winning the next war. That is why today, at my direction, we are drastically reducing the ridiculous amount of mandatory training that individuals and units must execute. We've already ended the most egregious. Now we're giving you back real time. Less PowerPoint briefings and fewer online courses, more time in the motor pool, and more time on the range. Our job is to make sure you have the money, equipment, weapons, and parts to train and maintain, and then you take it from there. Train like your warriors' lives depend on it, because they do. To that point, basic training is being restored to what it should be. Scary, tough, and disciplined. We're empowering drill sergeants to instill healthy fear in new recruits, ensuring that future warfighters are forged. Yes, they can shark attack, they can toss bunks, they can swear, and yes, they can put their hands on recruits.
Okay, so this, as a guy who understands the history of the treatment of plebes at the Naval Academy, including a lot of hazing in the early 70s. Check out a book called The Brass Factories, that resulted in permanent physical damage. And we know in some training circumstances that candidates have died from hazing. This concerns me. And we'll have to see how this is interpreted by DIs and detailers and so forth and so on. So I'm when I heard him say this, I was a little bit like, watch it.
This does not mean they can be reckless or violate the law, but they can use tried and true methods to motivate new recruits, to make them the warriors they need to be.
Again, like you said, you can't violate the law. Obviously, murder is against the law. Just color me concerned about how this could play out at recruit depots and other accession sources.
Back to basics at basic as well. Finally, as President Trump rightly pointed out when he changed the department name, the United States has not won a major theater war since the name was changed to the Department of Defense in 1947. One conflict stands out in stark contrast: the Gulf War. Why? Well, there's a number of reasons, but it was a limited mission with overwhelming force and a clear end state. But why did we execute and win the Gulf War the way we did in 1991? There's two overwhelming reasons. One was President Ronald Reagan's military buildup gave an overwhelming advantage. And two, military and Pentagon leadership had previous formative battlefield experiences. The men who led this department during the Gulf War were mostly combat veterans of the Vietnam War. They said never again to mission creep or nebulous end states. The same holds true today. Our civilian and military leadership is chock full of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who say never again to nation building and nebulous end states. This clear-eyed view, all the way in the White House, combined with President Trump's military buildup, postures us for future victories if, and we will, and when we embrace the War Department. And we must. We are preparing every day. We have to be prepared for war, not for defense.
So the thing he just unpacked there about basically Desert Storm, the last good war because of the end state, the Weinberger doctrine, so forth, is at once true, but it also leaves out the details surrounding every conflict since World War II. And you could say Desert Storm didn't really end anything. It just paused the chaos that was to follow by Bush 43 when we invaded Iraq, because that was an unfinished business. Saddam was still in power, WMD, so forth and so on. That area is, remains destabilized by the initial invasion of Desert Storm. And that's where it gave rise to, Osama bin Laden, all the other radical Islamicists when we got there and then didn't leave. So I know it makes sense in his mind, but there's a lot more to that notion in terms of the rightness and the wrongness. It also leaves out how iteratively these wars got more and more complex. Afghanistan, right? Started with 9/11. It's Al-Qaeda, get rid of Al-Qaeda, and then we conflated Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and tried to institute a government. So boom, fast forward 20 years, we leave kind of handing it back to the Taliban. In fact, that is nation building, the things that he's cautioning us against. But we're kind of nibbling at some of this now. So if you're saying is the only use of military power is full up war, then already we're not doing that with this current Department of War, and that opens the discussion to the domestic use of the military that's going on now, most recently in Portland or wherever. Are we going to war with that city, and what does victory look like? Or are we just doing sort of a police action, assisting local law enforcement, ... So, it's not as simple as what he laid out there, is my point.
Defense. We're training warriors, not defenders. We fight wars to win, not to defend. Defense is something you do all the time. It's inherently reactionary and can lead to overuse, overreach, and mission creep. War is something you do sparingly, on our own terms, and with clear aims. We fight to win. We unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy.
Because that isn't always true. I'll just say that.
We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country.
So as a guy who's dealt with some onerous ROE, I'm 100% behind what he just said there.
No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters. That's all I ever wanted as a platoon leader. And it's all my E6 squad leaders ever wanted, back to that E6 rule. We let our leaders fight their formations, and then we have their back. It's very simple, yet incredibly powerful. A few months ago, I was at the White House when President Trump announced his Liberation Day for America's trade policy. It was a landmark day. Well, today is another Liberation Day. The liberation of America's warriors, in name, in deed, and in authorities. You kill people and break things for a living. You are not politically correct and don't necessarily belong always in polite society.
Yeah, so this kind of horseshit is part of the problem. And so when you embolden that side of it, this is what leads to war crimes and other things. This sort of, I don't fit in society, so I got to go, kill people overseas. That's a little bit of a sort of a cliche that really the Secretary of Defense war shouldn't be giving life to.
We are not an army of one. We are a joint force of millions of selfless Americans. We are warriors. We are purpose-built, not for fair weather, blue skies, or calm seas. We were built to load up in the back of helicopters, 5 tons, or zodiacs in the dead of night, in fair weather or foul, to go to dangerous places, to find those who would do our nation harm, and deliver justice on behalf of the American people in close and brutal combat if necessary.
So we're also built for humanitarian things when there's a typhoon in the Far East. We're built for bilateral exercises. We are the ambassadors for the United States when a carrier pulls into port in the Med or the Persian Gulf, and we get to go on liberty. So again, it's not as sort of monolithic as what he just said there.
Go forth and do good things, hard things. President Trump has your back, and so do I. And you'll hear from him shortly. Move out and draw fire, because we are the War Department. Godspeed.
Room, attention.
Okay, so brings the room to attention. I was wondering, are they going to applaud? And that was preempted by the order to bring them to attention. So as you said, the president will come out. It was 30 minutes of a delay as they got set up for the president. And then we'll segue to the Secretary of War and the President. So you'll notice, for some reason, and I've noticed this over the last few days, the president has been wearing an F-35 lapel pin. I don't know if that was given to him by Lockheed Martin. If anybody knows the backstory there, please put it in the chat. But okay, so Secretary Hegseth, again, I see a lot of negative comments in the chat here. And, if you've watched this channel for any amount of time, you know that I'm not a huge fan. And I've known Pete Hegseth since 2007 when he first got out of the National Guard. He was a guest on my podcast when I was the editor of military.com. And then I talked to him in person at the DNC in Denver in 2008. So I've known him for a long time. This was way before Fox News and way before MAGA was a thing. So, again, look at the history of my coverage, this channel's coverage of his tenure. And you'll see that I'm not a fanboy, but I'm calling balls and strikes here. So what I'm saying is he did a fantastic job from just the theater of it. He was very well prepared. I don't know how long he's been working on this, but in terms of the dramatics and getting his message across, I haven't talked to anybody who's in the room. I probably will here, get some deep intel in the weeks to follow. But I give him high marks for that presentation. Now, break. Meanwhile, here comes the commander-in-chief, who appears to be completely unprepared. And I don't think he did any research or any prep for this particular thing. And I'll give you one small example when he's talking about, what is it he's talking about? Well,
Thank you very much, Pete.
Great
job you're doing, too.
Well, let me.
Fantastic job. I've never walked into a room so silent before. This is very, don't laugh. You're not allowed to do that.
So he's a little freaked out by how quiet it is, because usually he's walking into a rally and everybody's raucous. So I think this has got him a little bit unnerved.
You know what? Just have a good time. And if you want to applaud, you applaud. And if you want to do anything you want, you can do anything you want. And if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room. Of course, there goes your rank, there goes your future. But you just feel nice and loose, okay? Because we're all on the same team. And I was told that, sir, you won't hear a murmur in the room. I said, we got to loosen these guys up a little bit. So you just have a good time. But I want to thank Secretary Hegseth. I'm thrilled to be here this morning to address the senior leadership of what is once again known around the world as the Department of War. I know Pete spoke about it. He gave a great speech, I thought. Great speech. I don't want him to get so good. I hate that. You know, no, I hate it. I almost fired him. I said, "You can't. I don't want to go on after that." No, he gave a great speech, but he talked about Department of War. We were sitting there. I said, "Didn't it used to be called the Department of War?"
So he's not entirely kidding there. You know, I mean, this is where sometimes he can't suppress his, base impulses. So, I guess that's why people love him.
And he goes, "Yes, sir. They changed it like in the early 50s. So we won the First World War. We won the Second World War. We won everything in between and everything before that. We only won. And then we went in."
So Bart, you say, can we just get a summary? He rambles a lot. Dude, this speech took an hour. Okay. I'm going to give you one little segment of it. Yes, this is a summary. Thank you for showing up.
Way woke. That was probably the first sign of wokeness. And we changed it to defense instead of war. And I said, "What do you think? How do you think if we changed it back? Would that be a nice idea?" And Pete loved it immediately. Some people thought about it. They gave it a little thought. But in the end, we did it. And I have to be honest, it's so popular. I thought it would be met with fury on the left. But they're sort of giving up, I must be honest with you. They've had it. They've had it with Trump. They've been after me for so many years now. Here we are. Here we are. Come to the White House anytime you'd like. No, they've given up. They're bad, a lot of bad people.
So again, this is in front of several hundred, if not 1,000, active duty general and flag officers. Again, empirically, this sort of talk from the commander-in-chief is, let's say, inappropriate.
But all over, it's been so popular. It's been very popular. I really thought that we were going to have to sort of fight it through. There's been no fight. There's been no fight. Like what I called the Gulf of America, the Gulf.
Yeah, so he goes on this jag about how he changed the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Again, these folks have come from a couple dozen time zones, from places like Indo-PACOM, CENTCOM. These are 3- and 4-star combatant commanders, strike group commanders who are aboard carriers like the Ford and other places from around the world to sit here and hear, remarks from the commander-in-chief, and this is what they get.
Gulf of America, because to me it was always the Gulf of America. I could never understand. We have 92% of the frontage, and for years, actually 350 years, they were there before us. It was called the Gulf of Mexico. I just had this idea. I'm looking at a map. I'm saying, we have most of the frontage. Why is it Gulf of Mexico? Why isn't it the Gulf of America? And I made the change, and it went smoothly. I mean, we had a couple of fake news outlets that refused to make the change. And then one of them, AP, took us to court, and we won. And the judge, who was a somewhat liberal judge, said, the name is the Gulf of America.
So if you see him not looking at the teleprompter, this is what you get, this sort of stream of consciousness that's capital R random.
Because AP refused to call it the Gulf of America. They wrote, they're not a good outfit, by the way. They call it the Gulf of Mexico. I said, no, the Gulf of America is the name. And the judge actually said that, in fact, you can't even go into the room because what you're doing is not appropriate. The name is the Gulf of America. Google Maps changed the name. Everybody did, but AP wouldn't. And then we won in court. How about that? Isn't that so cool?
Okay, and then he this is the end. There you can see some folks are clapping, but it was, again, they were brought to attention. Mostly sort of an awkward silence. So it's not like a rally, one of his rallies. So I think he didn't quite know what to do here. And that was it. So in total, started about 8:15, ended about 10:30 or so. And then I guess the attendees maybe are doing some stuff, in country, whether it's, going to the Hill to talk to the professional staffers or the HASC or the SASC, or go to the Pentagon to check in with their service chief or whatever. But then they're going to haul ass back to wherever they're stationed because they do, jobs of great consequence. So the question that many have asked is, did this have to take this format? You know, and if you were to ask Secretary Hegseth, he would say, yeah, I wanted to look these folks in the eye and deliver it mano a mano sort of a thing. And only in person does it have this sort of, a VTC, doesn't hack it. Just like if all of us were in a room, all 2,600 of us were in a room, and I was on the stage, it would have a different vibe than what we're doing here on StreamYard. Sure. The total price of this event is in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. When you consider admirals, generals don't travel by themselves. They're in this case, they brought their command master chief, their force master chief, their command sergeant majors, and so there's that part. They're flying airplanes back and forth, commercial, usually coach, if not military transports. And, they stay in hotels and they take Ubers back and forth I-95. And so it does add up. So there was certainly a cost associated with that, basically 2 hours and 15 minutes of a presentation. But again, I give Secretary Hegseth high marks for his presentation. Never mind what you guys think of the politics or his sincerity. I give President Trump very low marks for his lack of prep, and let's just say give a shit for his part of that presentation. If you want your IQ to go down, watch his entire 1 hour on some other YouTube channel, and you'll see what I mean. Now, again, what this will do in terms of the force, we'll see. I don't know. Again, my job is to, insofar as I'm capable, try for you subscribers and viewers to call balls and strikes. So the metrics to look at is recruiting, retention. I didn't add this part of Secretary Hegseth's remarks because he mentioned procurement and technology and evaluation. And he said that's a separate conversation. So as I've said, sort of in the outro of the F-35 GAO episode, doing push-ups with the troops is one thing. How about getting the F-35 to the fleet? How about getting Ford-class carrier and Seawolf submarine, Virginia-class submarine, whatever the next sidearm is, what's the personal vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, name your blue chip program or your program in the program of record, the Pentagon budget. I was encouraged because the other thing that President Trump said that was substantive was we're going to plus up the defense budget or the budget request, because remember, Congress has to approve it, but to $1 trillion. So the last budget that was forwarded was like $850 billion. And now this administration is going to forward one of $1 trillion. So certainly that's music to the ears of the defense industry. That's music to the ears of the training officers in various commands. I know that flight hour funding is always of great concern to our naval aviators and Marine Corps aviators across the fleet. I just chatted with them down at Oceana. We were at the air show last weekend. So that's not bad news. But that's where the rubber meets the road. So yes, cool speech, bro. Now roll up your sleeves and do the work. Focus on the hard things, because defense procurement is a hard thing. You have to know the details of budget cycles and working with the Hill and working with industry and so forth and so on. That takes focus and perseverance. So we'll see how they play out there. So that's going to be my measure of this era, this administration, the Trump 47 administration effectiveness. All right. So we've had a great attendance here. As soon as I hang up, this will be an episode. So thanks everybody for your comments, and you can come back and read what you wrote or read the repartee you were having with somebody else. Because Mrs. Mooch isn't doing the moderating. I don't have time to go in there and except for a couple of occasions here that I caught some stuff out of the corner of my eye. So we'll just call this a live stream. As always, thank you for your support. If you're not a subscriber, I recommend you become one so you don't miss things like the heads up that live streams like this one are happening and the other stuff that we have coming down the road on a regular and persistent basis. So thanks, everybody. And I look forward to talking to you again very soon.